Good morning, friends. Welcome to my library. And as you can see, I'm actually bringing live. I'm talking to you live, and I'm basically talking about the important incident that happened today, which is the November 18th. And in this program, basically, I'm live, so you can actually associate with me live. You have any questions or any comments, please feel free to send in those questions and suggestions, and I will address and talk to you immediately. All right. So today, the incident is related to Vasco da Gama. And what is that incident? Let's find out. Well, in the year 1497, the Portuguese navigator Vasco da Gama reaches Cape of Good Hope. Now, in those days, it was a very big deal because what used to happen is that people were not very familiar with the sea routes, and the spice war actually triggered the European during the European Renaissance, because the spice route was actually from India to Europe through Middle East, and because of the price escalation by the Dutch on the spices, the Europeans were forced to search for a sea route, because before that there was no problem. The spices were reaching via the land route into Europe, and spices were very expensive, and it was a very expensive commodity because the spices are not found in Europe. They are not natively grown in Europe. And that really triggered Europeans to start looking for India. Why India? Because India was producing spices. I mean, no brainer there. However, there were two people who are very well regarded in this space. One is Christopher Columbus, who was also Portuguese, and the other Portuguese navigator was Vasco da Gama. He was a great navigator, and he was a outstanding captain. And Vasco da Gama convinced the royal family of Portugal that he will find the route to India by known methods, and it was a long way to India, and because there was no Suez Canal in those days, so he had to take circumnavigate a longer route, basically via crossing the entire Africa and then reaching India. It was a Herculean task considering the technology of those days. So we are talking about 1497. It's an important day to remember. It's a long time back. And while we have GPS, but it was a Herculean task. Well, Christopher Columbus decided to go the other way, but today we will not talk about that. Let's talk about what happened today, which is now November 18th. The Vasco da Gama and his fleet reached Cape of Good Hope, which was the southern tip of Africa. And when he reached there, there is a story. I mean, before he reached India, there is a lot of folklore, and he did not know where to go, because now he has reached Cape of Good Hope. And while he's traveling through the ocean, he was ensuring that he is taking the known routes and people who have traveled far off, so their experiences and all that, so that he is always very close to the land, so in case of any emergency he can reach the land. So that was his idea of traveling. Now when he reached the Cape of Good Hope, he did not know the route, because before him nobody had traveled through Indian Ocean. So he was wondering what to do, and he started talking to local people, trying to find if anybody has gone to India from South Africa. And so basically, fortunately for him, he found that there was a captain. His name was Patel, and he actually basically he had a fleet of 3 ships, and he was traveling from India to Africa, to South Africa in fact, Indians were doing that journey for thousands of years prior to this gentleman called Patel. So basically what happened was he got the direction to reach India from this captain called Patel. And and Patel was very friendly and he wanted to help. So he said, okay, why didn't you tag along? So he actually took Vasco da Gama along with him, and then he dropped him off at Calicut, and that's how Vasco da Gama reached India. And then he met the king in Calicut, and basically talked about it, and he knew that he's reached India, but he failed to impress the local Indians. So that was his first landing in India, and he wanted to establish a trade, but he failed to do so because in any trade there is always give and take, and he wanted to take the spices back, but there was no deal struck during the first trip of when he landed at Calicut. So this is what happened. And when he landed in when he started, prior to that, he was funded by the royal family, and he had 4 ships and very travel worthy crew he was given. So he actually had a lot of support from the royal family, and he was actually working for the royals and imperial. So the whole banner of his fleet was imperial, the Portugal king, and he was supposed to basically find land so that they can colonize. That was the whole idea. Now this is even before the colonization even began. So we are talking about something which happened even before the Europeans started colonizing, and Vasco da Gama probably did not know that his trip or his journey will actually end up in Europeans racing against each other in colonizing rest of the world. Well, this is a famous route which he took to reach India, and today, as I said, is an important day because this is basically an important journey that Vasco da Gama took, simply because this journey and the outcome of this journey changed the world as we know it today. As you can see, I'm an Indian and I can speak fantastic English, fluent English, and so on and so forth. So a lot of Indians today speak English, and that language was obviously brought in by the colonizing European powers into India. And today India has become even a larger English speaking country than United States of America. So like USA was also colonized, and India was also colonized, as like many other countries in the world, in Africa, in Asia Pac, they were colonized. All right, so let's continue our discussion on Vasco da Gama trip. And as you can see in this chart, I'm trying to show that when he started his journey from Portugal, he reached the age-old identified route. He did not try any adventurism. He actually stuck to his plan, and he went very close to the land, and he actually followed the olden charts of people who have traveled so far. So his challenge was how to travel beyond the Cape of Good Hope, and that is when his journey got totally erratic. As you can see, he was sailing very close to the land because he did not know what lies in the Indian Ocean. There was no GPS, there were no satellite, there were no pictures and all that. So he did not know how big is the Indian Ocean, what lies, is that land there. So he ensured, after crossing, after today, which is November 18th in the year 1497, he ensured that he is always very close to the land. And this is his route. As you can see, he is going in a very zigzag manner in order to find his destination to India. All right. So when he basically returned, he identified India. He reached India. He managed to meet the king, and but he was not able to strike any deal. Because that was the major objective. You can remember that the royal family is funding your trip for what? There has to be some give and take. So he actually was not able to get any deal struck after the first trip, but he was able to successfully finish his trip and return back successfully. So when he returned, it took him many years. Basically, in 1499 he returned to Portugal, and he was given a hero's welcome. He was given a hero's welcome because he was obviously a great sailor and the first European to find a sea route to a far off country like India. And that really started the race among Spanish, Portuguese, Dutch, Germans, and English to basically send their ships to far off India and establish their own sea route. So obviously he had done a great job, and he was given a noble title by the king himself of Dom, which is equivalent to Lord. And so he actually made good fortune for himself, and he actually endured after taking such a risky journey to find India, and he was able to locate it. All right, so on his second trip, because in the first trip he was not able to strike any deal with the Indian royalty here in order to have some sort of a give and take, because India was a rich country. As you know, that India was in those days was contributing to about 25 to 30% of the global GDP. So they used to call India as a golden bird, because there was a lot of riches, a lot of gold, and everything, whatever you need was available within India. So Indians did not need anything from Europe unless they have something to offer. So he was not able to close a deal during his previous visit. So he thought he will use the force. And during the second trip, when he returned to India, he actually returned with armada of 15 battleships, which was again a wooden ship only, nothing special. I mean, if you look at the modern battleship, it has a lot of guns and all that. But in those days, they used to have slightly more thicker armor, etc. So he returned with 15 battleships, and in order to basically defeat the Indian king and plunder the city. That was his idea. So there was a big battle which happened between the King of Calicut and Vasco da Gama army, and well, we don't know too much about that, and I don't think he succeeded in doing that, but he actually succeeded in killing a lot of people during that invasion or conquest that he wanted to do. I am not sure what triggered him to basically plunder the Calicut or attack the Calicut, because he could have basically started a business deal, but he didn't do that. He actually chose the more aggressive way of attacking, and he got a lot of bad name because of that. And he also burned a ship full of Muslim pilgrims who were basically going towards Mecca, and his army actually burned that ship, killing all of these Muslim pilgrims alive in the ship. So he got a lot of bad name because of that he actually carried out such a incident for no reason. I mean, there was no reason to do that. Nevertheless, back home also he got really a bad name also, and then because this second trip also did not result in anything which is fruitful, so he became not very popular. He did not remain. He basically fell into some sort of obscurity where people didn't consider him, and his job was taken over by much more influential or statesmen type people from Portugal, and they took over where he left. So because his methods were not very much liked, and for almost like 2 decades he was kind of forgotten in Portugal itself, even though he did such a fantastic job, until when they were able to establish, the Portugal kingdom were able to establish themselves in today Goa. Then to give respect to Vasco da Gama, the Portugal king decided to appoint him as the India's viceroy, the first viceroy. So now this is very, very important. I mean, for people who want to know Indian history, the British came 200 years after this incident, or maybe 250 years after this. So while the British were able to rule the entire India, but Vasco da Gama really became the first viceroy of foreign origin in India. And British came and they also appointed their viceroy, but later on. So you can imagine that this act of the Portugal really triggered the competition among the European countries to establish a colonial race across the world. And this was the first example where Vasco da Gama was sent to India as a first viceroy in the year 1524. However, his success was short-lived. He was bitten by Indian malaria mosquito, and after reaching India within 3 months, he died of malaria. So, kind of a sad end of this great sailor. He was not a politician. He was a sailor, and he actually was only looking at accomplishing his goal of finding India and solving the problem of the European nation, which was about getting access to the low-cost spice trade and have their own sea routes so that they can control the price, because there was a price war going on in Europe in those days when it comes to spices. So spices triggered the colonization, and the Portuguese Vasco da Gama became the first viceroy ever anywhere outside their own home country. And that is why this is an interesting day, because today he reached Cape of Good Hope, and we know that South Africa was also colonized, and South Africa was the last country to get freedom from apartheid. So friends, we had an interesting discussion. I will meet you on Monday with something more relevant or about incident which happened on Monday next week. Until then, you enjoy your weekend and keep rocking. Bye-bye, and thanks for watching.